A commander walks in among his troops, looks at them, and then detonates a bomb on him, killing all of his soldiers. Sounds insane? Sounds impossible? Sounds unrealistic? Yes, of course, if you're looking at the physical realm. But if you're looking at the eighth front in which Israel is engaged in, this is exactly what Yair Golan, the former deputy chief of staff of the State of Israel, did in an interview to Israeli media this week. Hi, I'm Danny Seaman, and you're listening to Straight Up, the show in which we try to give you insights into what is happening here in Israel that you'll get from no other source. He committed a suicide bombing. Why do I call it a suicide bombing? Because he literally ended his career. Because no Israeli is going to vote for somebody who does something so outrageous and makes such outlandish accusations against the IDF. And we're not talking about some outside military. We're talking about our sons and our daughters, those in the battlefield today, fighting in the war for Israel's survival. And for this man to go and say and make the accusations that he made, you don't need Arab propaganda anymore. You don't need Hamas propaganda. He's done all the work for them.
ישראל בדרך להיות מדינה מוקצת בין העמים, דרום אפריקה של פעם, אם היא לא תחזור ותתנהל כמדינה שפויה. מדינה שפויה לא מנהלת לחימה נגד אזרחים, לא הורגת תינוקות כתחביב, ולא שמה לעצמה מטרות של גירוש אוכלוסייה.
He committed a suicide bombing against our soldiers. He created this outrageous accusation that every anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic piece of crap around the world will be quoting now. They don't have to say anything anymore. He did the work for them. You think that's not going to happen? They sit and they wait for every word that we put out. They have not been able to defeat us in the battlefield. Even after the surprise attack on October 7th, in which they could have rampaged throughout Israel, they were soundly defeated. Why? Because the Israeli people are convinced in the justification of our cause, because we know who we're dealing with, and because they came in and they murdered our babies, they murdered our children, they murdered our men and women, they raped and pillaged and stole and celebrated it, and they aired it on social media that is being denied now. And for somebody in Israel to come and accuse the Israeli soldiers of such outlandish accusations, well, he's cooperating with them at the moment. Because, as I said, there are 7 fronts in which Israel is dealing in the battlefield. It's Gaza, it's Judean Samaria, it's Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and even Yemen. And in every one of these fields, we have been successful. The one area in which Israel is finding it difficult is the 8th front. The 8th front is that of public diplomacy, public relations, psychological warfare. This area they have been very successful at by turning the international community against Israel during one of its most justified battles in the history of humankind. We're fighting the most evil elements of jihadist Islam. And they've made it very clear what they intend to do to us, not only because what they did physically, but what ideologically they proclaim time and time again. And it's not enough that we have international pressure of all sorts of internal interests of the Europeans and others who cater to these terrorists, who just last week entertained and invited a genocidal leader of Syria now, Julani, who's been murdering Christians in Syria and Druze and anybody who does not follow jihadist Islam. And he is received with warm arms and welcome in France and by Britain and by Canada, these same countries who set out to criticize Israel this week. So in this battlefield, where everything is important and influences public opinion towards the state of Israel, to come and do what Yair Golan did is the equivalent of a suicide bombing internally among our troops. Well, to discuss this issue of the 8th front in which Israel is dealing with, I today have asked a special guest to come over and elaborate on the issue of psychological warfare and how it affects the battlefield. My guest today is Dr. Ron Schleifer. Ron is a professor for communications at Ariel University. He is the leading expert and perhaps the most veteran expert in Israel on the issue of psychological warfare. He is the author of the recently published book, Post-Psychological Warfare, and he's written 7 additional books on the topic of psychological warfare. One of them of which I'm very familiar with since we co-authored a book on Israel and the foreign media. We wanted to call it The Cradle of Fake News. The publishers weren't too happy with that title, so they kept it the very mundane Israel in the foreign media. But I thought, in light of what is happening here and the fact that Israel today, in addition to the 7 fronts that it is facing in the battlefield, there's another major battlefield that affects, and every one of us are aware of, which is the psychological psyops, cognitive warfare, psychological warfare front which Israel is dealing with. Ron, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, just a general idea, what is psychological warfare? Most of us have an idea, but you go into the more details and how it affects us, each and every one of us, on the day-to-day.
The idea is how to use nonviolent persuasive measures in order to help winning the war. This is the shortest, closest, tightest definition that I can think of. Every bullet has a psychological impact. Every bomb has psychological impact. But this is not the case. What we're looking at in psychological warfare is how to use nonviolent, persuasive arguments that would, in case that you don't have a gun, so you can persuade your enemy not to pull the trigger of his gun, which then you're equal. You're equally strong. Then your enemy is just as weak as you, because he might have any weapons that you don't. But if he's persuaded not to use it, then you won. You practically won. Now the question is how you can persuade somebody who really hates you and wants to besiege you, to be victorious over you. How do you persuade him? One of the most effective psychological measures is guilt.
Guilt.
Yeah, we all motivated.
No, so
by
we, as Jews, we've lost already because we constantly feel guilty.
Exactly. No, everyone and everything has a weak point. So the idea is to find out this weak point and then push it. And when you find a weak point in anything, in war and in love, or in business, or on a day-to-day communication, you want to achieve something. So you want to find the point where your adversary, enemy, opponent, whatever, all along the scale of hostility, would yield to you, even if a customer or a business associate. So what does he really want? What is he afraid of? What might motivate him? What's the leverage that you have over him? And if you can do it on anything else, so why not use it in war?
We can go into ancient history, but I'll keep it to what we're familiar with. I would say 20th century and the 21st century. Starting with the 20th century, you have these new technologies, radio, television, that affected the wars back then, and if you can give us how it developed over the years to where we are today.
I would go before technology a little bit. Lenin is the chief, the capo di tutti capi, the Pope, the chief rabbi of persuasion, of propaganda in the 20th century.
This was before coming to power.
Yeah, sure.
This is what led them. Movement. That's what brought them
to power.
Okay.
Look, he had a nation of 150 million, mostly illiterate peasants. Okay, and he had to deliver to them the complex philosophy of Marxism, which it's a huge encyclopedia, right? So how can you transfer a complex philosophy into illiterate peasant audience? And he did it. He did it using color, using visuals, using emotion, using slogans. Okay, so and he compressed a huge, enormous body of learning into short slogans, something that the peasants or the factory workers would understand. Okay, so for example, bread and work. Yeah, it's what the state should, the ideal state should provide for its citizens. And
So he took the complexities of Marxism and
yes,
simplified it
yes,
for the masses,
right,
as you were saying, the illiterate, etc.
yes.
I am making the jump. We'll get to this soon, but I'm making the jump to current days. It affects not only the illiterate and the ignorant. Apparently, it's effective also
It
with the
affected the
educated.
intellectuals. It affected the intellectuals. Well, the intellectuals really gave their lives, literally, to work for the revolution. Okay, but they didn't know what happens always, that they would be the first to have their heads in the guillotine, for the axe to chop them, because intellectuals are very dangerous class of people, because people look up at them and see, oh, these are the wisest, the cleverest. They know, so let's follow them. Well, he managed to use the intellectuals to his advantage, for the political advantage, and then he got rid of them, and then Stalin got rid of them as well.
First victims of their own.
Yes, naturally, yeah, the what do you call it, the grist of the revolution, right? So, and then, of course, he adapted very quickly to the new technologies, mainly the cinema.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
the
was thinking
cinema
radio, cinema.
preceded the radio. Okay, radio was used later on by Goebbels, right? But the communists, the Soviet revolutionaries, they used cinema. They were so um, advanced in their political thinking, in the way of how to use, how or abuse, right, the new methods, in order to, they would have something like called the propaganda train. So they would paint the wagons in red, and they would paint them with posters and simple visual messages that the audience, that the viewers would understand, and then they would come up to a pre-arranged station, and then cars and motorbikes were loaded from the train, and told and invited everybody to come for the speeches that Lenin and his colleagues would come, and they would preach. In the meantime, the cinema crew would photograph, or not photograph, would shoot the. I don't want to use the word shoot, because it's on the communist cases. So they would photograph the audience, and then they would develop it in a mobile lab, and then they would add it to a prearranged film. So the audience, illiterate audience, the peasants, would see a story, persuasive story, and themselves into that.
Made it personal.
And that made it so effective in persuading this is the future, and these guys are sophisticated, and these guys are really a good replacement for the Tsarist regime, which they were so used for so many decades, not decades, centuries.
Yeah.
So this shows you how the use of technology, you could call it primitive, but it doesn't matter.
The same things are happening today.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's about persuasion, no violence until the war broke out, and the revolution and the civil war. And so I would say, if you want to analyze what's happening today, go to early Leninism stages. Lenin also incorporated two different doctrines of persuasion. One is called agitation, and the other is called propaganda. Now, with propaganda, we're all aware of it. The medieval church, and that there's okay. With agitation, it's a doctrine how to agitate or how to use emotion in order to move an audience. So it's done with music. It's done with hate speech. It's done with posters, light and darkness, the lighting techniques, etc. And then he incorporated into agitprop. Okay,
Agitprop?
agitprop.
Oh, okay.
Anybody who learned the history of socialism and of political revolutionaries thought it has come up across this. So he approached large audiences, agitated them to the emotional, and then led the way. And the main target audience were the Tsarist police and army. Okay, now as the Tsar, he is very powerful, but he's only one man. Okay, so he has his aides, and his aides have the army and the police in order to deliver what the wishes of the ruler. Now, if you hit that meeting point between the police and those who give them orders, now then you
You weaken that aspect. They
you
lose.
paralyze
You
your opponent. This is, by the way, why in America today you have to defund the police, or the call to defund the police.
to do. You're right.
Right? Okay, because if the regime doesn't have anybody who will do what the rises or what the matter is calling for, so then there's no regime. Psychological warfare.
This is the same thing happening in our own society. Here in Israel, before October 7th, you had those who were trying to topple the government
Sure.
from within,
Sure.
using, now we have a two-tier battle going on here. One, the internal political strife, and we have our outside enemies who were salivating, watching this happening and waiting for the opportunity. But we'll get that to that in a moment. I want to go back to these techniques that are being used, these same techniques that the Nazis used, the same techniques that the people in those who opposed the Vietnam War are using. These are all communist tactics that were then developed, and the new technologies, television, social media, everything is used. And it's basically to create that weakness of the authority, to delegitimize it in a way, and
to dictate, to perform their policy.
Right. Over the years, Israel has been dealing with the delegitimization that the enemies of the state of Israel have been causing, using the same type of techniques.
Sure.
So suddenly, and I'm jumping forward again to October 7th, you have an alignment between those who are looking to delegitimize us, working. They didn't have to work together. They took advantage of the fact that there were those who were trying to delegitimize the government of the state of Israel internally for internal political reasons.
Sure.
So whether or not it was a betrayal or not is irrelevant.
Exactly.
These two things collided.
Exactly. It's a meeting of interests.
Yes.
Just like what we say, the Red-Green Alliance. Okay.
Right.
I've studied a bit of history, and all throughout the ages, there were agreements, triumvirates. We had in Napoleon, we had in the Roman Empire, we had all over triumvirates. What is a triumvirate? It's three people who represent three largest sections of power, and they meet because they realize that the only way for them to win is to get together. But always, without no exception, always then the struggle begins afterwards. Once they get to power, they try to get one against the other two, or two against the other one.
When you mentioned the Romans, how you had the triumvirate.
Julius Caesar.
Right.
All right. So first of all, he has to get rid of Pompey, and then he has to get rid of the others, and Crussus, and then so this is the Red-Green Alliance. What we were having today is the red is the former communists, China, Russia, etc., and the green are the Islamists. Okay, so they are both against the Western powers, the Western philosophy.
I would say Western
America.
liberalism.
Yeah, liberalism has been hijacked.
Right.
No, I'm trying
The liberal
to
value
compare it
of Western.
true liberal values. Yeah. Okay. Before the term was
Yeah.
hijacked. And so at the moment, Russia is working together with China and with Iran. Okay, and Qatar is also on the same. Okay, but they're both inherently alien. I mean,
Right.
religion for the communists, it was anathema, and politics, Islam is a religious politics. Okay, so eventually they will turn against each other. It's just a matter of time. But in the meantime, they have a common interest of toppling the West. So it's I mean, I mean, you look at the future. I mean, you know how it's going to be. It's not that you're a prophet or anything. This is how things have always been, and this is what is happening now. The trouble is that Israel is caught in between. So we are the mutual enemy of the Reds and the Greens, and they're both against us. So this is the problem, and we don't have the intellectual structure or the ideology. Not all of us, anyway. We don't have the ideology to work against the two. I'm not talking about the physical power that we cannot have, but the land of Israel, its geographical location, and the people of the land of Israel always had to deal with external pressures. Each one, once in ancient times was Egypt, and then it was Syria, and basically we're the same between Egypt and the northern forces. Now it's Turkey, which is larger Syria, etc.
But I'm going to go back now to the deal, what Israel is dealing with. We looked at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
If we look at Israel has been dealing with this war to delegitimize it.
Right.
This has gone back since its inception.
Yes.
It increased with every failure that the Arabs had in the battlefield. Their effort in this battlefield, the psychological, cognitive warfare, information war, they stressed that, and they fought and they continue to fight against Israel externally, trying to influence the international community, and also internally, especially in times of war as we're experiencing now. If you can elaborate a little on those.
As I was saying in the beginning,
So
those
you notice that I deliberately didn't use the word hasbara.
Yes, and I also noticed you didn't use the word propaganda, which is you use all its synonyms,
Right.
cog war, and that. But the trouble is that the term propaganda has been delegitimized, and this is interestingly a result of the Second World War. Goebbels is depicted as the world's biggest liar.
Right.
Okay, let me say this: he's no bigger liar than anyone else
In any
that-
government.
Yeah, in fighting a war. Okay, but this is probably the result of the American propaganda, which depicted him in such an effective way that he has become the epitome of lying and devilish thinking, which he was. Okay, but this is because the extermination of the Jews and the other minorities which he was responsible for. Since the Second World War, there is no more use of propaganda. Propaganda, in essence, is something neutral, right? Propaganda is a massive persuasion effort. Now, what we see today is, on a historical level, the largest persuasion effort. It's lasting already over nearly 80 years. okay, then against the state of Israel. Even the Cold War was 40, 45 years long. Okay, the Second World War, the First World War, were 4, 5, 6, 7 years long. We have a ideological, political, condensed struggle against Israel and against the Jewish people for the past 80 years. Okay, this is unprecedented, and it is happening because our enemies cannot overcome us physically.
Right.
They would have loved to. They planned to. They invested so much in these efforts. We have a major war every decade, and we defeated them time and again, and yet when it comes to Islam, there's no defeat in Islam.
Right.
Okay, there's only victory, and if there's no victory, there's going to be a victory. So Islam has never forgotten Spain yet, okay, even though they haven't been there for 500 years, but they still long for Spain.
They use the word Andalus.
Andalus, yeah.
And if you go into the area of Shechem,
Yes.
which they call Nablus, another misrepresentation, which is Neapolis that the Romans gave the name to. But in Shechem,
Hellenists, yes.
there are places there called Andalus. They intend on returning to Spain. I'm mentioning just this because the Spanish government that finds it necessary to be opposed to Israel doesn't understand
Yes.
that once they get rid of us, they're on the target as well.
Speaking of the Russian intellectuals
Yes.
at the end of the 19th century.
Right.
Okay. Right. So the beauty, so to speak, of psychological warfare is that you can use it, especially if you don't have a physical power enough to subdue your enemy. And they've been using it, and it fits very well on a cultural level because the Arab society is an oppressed society from its birth. It's
Not by Israel.
not by Israel, but from within Arab and Islamic forces. Okay, they've been there since time immemorial, before they adopted Islam, etc. Islam was adopted by the sword, and it was exported by the sword. All right, so nowadays, if they don't have if they don't have the sword, so they have the word. If I may quote something, a saying that is related to Napoleon, in the long run, the word is mightier than the sword. Okay, so the Arabs, as a society, have a tremendous capability to deceive because, resources are scarce. And so you have to survive at any cost. So you have to look persuasive. You have to be persuasive. You have to be able to survive. And then if it doesn't coincide with the truth, it's irrelevant because you have to survive on any case. Now, I could be easily be accused of racism or anything, but first of all, I don't care. Secondly, is you have to realize this is a cultural element which you need to understand. On the other hand, with Jews, is if you say a lie, Jews also had to survive. But if you say a lie, or Christians for that effect, well, people lie all the time, but they feel bad about it, or they feel bad when it is discovered. And this is not the case within the Arab and the Islamic societies. You have to survive, and this is what matters. Loss of faith is much worse than anything else.
The loss of honor, the loss of pride.
And loss of honor and loss of pride, etc. These are completely different values than the Jewish values and Western values. So now when you use propaganda like famine in Gaza or baby killing for enjoyment or cruelty as a natural Talmudic trait, it fits well because I mean you just throw this
natural.
comes natural.
So that's the point I try to make to people, that if what they're saying was so true, where is the evidence? Why do they? Now, there are pictures here and there, but the extent in which they're trying to project or portray what is happening has no basis in reality. And therefore, they will use images coming out of Syria from the past of atrocities committed in Syria, in Yemen. They'll use dolls. Now we're talking about how they can abuse technology. You have, on one hand, AI that can be used to deceive and project a message or an image. Or you have props that they can use, such as babies, that look very convincing, look very real. And they're using this to create an emotional pull on the masses internationally. We're going back to
Agitprop, Lenin. Yeah, that's the idea. It goes on the lower echelons of society, and it goes on prime minister level. Okay, Ronald Reagan, a relatively pro-Israel president, put a photograph of a you were at the time, it was from your time as the head of the
No, I was in the army then, but I remember him that this was in the Lebanon war.
first Lebanon war, right,
Back in the 80s.
a baby girl with amputated hands and legs. Okay, and he put
Supposedly
it
done by Israel.
It was done by Israel, yeah, but the thing is that the baby was hurt by a PLO bombing. Israel took the baby and nursed it in a hospital, bandaged its hand and feet, and then the photograph that taken, it was retouched into form that on a white sheet the bandages were not seen. So you have a baby without arms and legs, which had an impact on the president of the United States and a friend of Israel.
Hey, so nobody's immune to.
Nobody is immune to that, and once you know, that's a weakness.
Right.
That's a weakness. Once you know the weakness, you push that button on time and again. It's very effective.
So let's jump from that to what is happening in Israeli society today. In addition to the war that they set out on, and as I mentioned before, very much because they were encouraged for seeing the internal strife in Israel, once they're losing and they lost in the battlefield, then they're trying to continue, first off, on their own society. As you said before, there's no such thing as a loss, but more so to try to create division in our society. How is Hamas doing that, despite its very bleak situation right now in the battlefield? How are they trying to affect Israeli society?
Well, the conflict with the Palestinians didn't start on October 7th. All right. It started many decades ago. And the Soviets capitalized on that. This is why propaganda is so effective. You don't invent a lie from scratch. Okay, you ride on top of a partial truth or accepted truth, and then you develop from there. So the Soviets took the results of the War of Independence in Israel,
The 48 war.
in the 48. I call War Independence. The 48 War is, by the way, is a success for the Palestinian propaganda. With 48, it's just another war.
Right.
For us, it was a war of liberation against 5 Arab armies. Okay. And in 1965, they advised Nasser, the Egyptian prime minister, to consolidate all the factions of the Palestinians, of the leftovers, all the small organization students, and made the PLO. All right.
And created the thinking, the Palestinian
Right.
issue.
Right. That's the beginning of the Palestinian issue. And then they started using the Egyptian intelligence service who equipped the refugees around Israel with mines and weapons. And what they thought that would implicate Israel in a regional war. And of course, this would be the end of Israel.
And stop. Once again, you see that they took these people who were in refugee status,
Yes.
who they kept in squalor,
Right.
and they said, you want to make some money? They weren't allowed to work in these Arab countries where they were staying at the time. So if you want to do something, they trained them in what we knew as the fada'in, or the
Right.
terrorist activity,
Right.
but they were civilians. So you have this situation where these people are attacking Israel, and any Israeli reaction is immediately perceived as attacking civilians.
Right. And then Israel retaliated against the Jordan for example, and that would implicate that would keep developing, and then would be the war. Okay, and they were right. There was a war, but the results were not as they had foreseen. It was a 6-day war, and the anti-Semites at the time were telling a joke. It was an unprecedented victory in the history of warfare. Okay, and the Semites at the time, why did the Jews won the war in 6 days? Because they hired the tanks by the week. Okay, so yeah, well, the anti-Semites were doing which I'm quoting that in order to show how unprecedented this victory had been. Now, the day after they realized the enormous defeat, started the erosion of the Israeli victory. Okay, and
until then, we were the darlings of the world, the Jews who had returned, after the Holocaust, how we rose. But once we became victorious,
so the themes were Israel is a liability; it's not the asset. The Arabs are the asset of the world. Look, they'll give the energy, and they control the energy, and they'll develop. They are the just cause is the Arab cause, etc. It's nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. What has changed is the technology to spread the messages.
Right.
And to adapt the messages. So first of all, the PLO was looking for what was called a secular democratic, which is nonsense. So it's Islam. Yeah, it's not secular. It's not neither secular nor democratic. Okay. And then when Hamas comes to power, so it's the it's the world, not world, sorry, the Islamic Republic, which they're going to happily build
it's like Iran is a
region.
republic and
Exactly.
democracies.
Exactly. This is how it's done. Now, what had to be done is to persuade the Israeli intellectuals about the unjustness of their cause. And the way it was done is by organizing tours in the refugee camps. Now, Israel is at fault on this matter because it did not destroy the refugee camps. And in order to rebuild them,
not destroy it, but
to rebuild them.
Exactly. Make them out of it.
Right.
Like happened in every conflict.
Yes.
Where refugees are eventually put up.
Right.
The Arabs deliberately didn't absorb them.
And
Israel,
they said, we're going to return them anyway to Jordan, so why invest? So this was a serious failure. This was a serious failure. In Gaza, Israel started to attempt to rehabilitate, is that the right word, for reconstruct. So what they did is what the same thing that the Viet Cong did in Vietnam in order to subvert the government effort, is to exert violence against the locals if they accepted government help. Okay, so they killed anybody who had agreed for his home to be destroyed and rebuilt by Israel. Or when Israel wanted to, the first thing to do is the drainage system in the refugee camps. So they sabotaged the pipes and threatened anybody who would permit and to do
They wanted
anything
to
with
keep
that.
them in in that
Exactly.
situation.
And in that situation, they would take the Israeli intellectuals. Okay, and
Play on their
believe me,
emotions.
I've been there those years, and there's no way that you could become a pro-Zionist after you're walking on the squalid streets of Khan Yunis and Jubalia and in Nablus and whatever. And
So
this was done on purpose.
They were manipulating the situation to frame the narrative, to
Exactly.
create an impression of what is happening.
Exactly.
Which, yes, there's a truth to it, but in the broader picture, that's not what's happening. And it's very easily, and that's what bothers me, is the ability in which they can emotionally manipulate those who are supposedly the ones who work with their minds first. They very easily were able to abuse their feelings and take them totally out of the intellectual aspect of it.
Right. Yeah, the one who first used the intellectuals as a tool of persuasion was a communist, a German communist, who his name is not very familiar, unfortunately. His name was Willy Münzenberg, a very charismatic person, a communist from his early youth in Germany, and he came to Lenin in the 20s and said that he has a way of drawing the West into the hands of communism. And the way he did it is through building a huge network of media, publishing houses, opening journals. He even had a network of film studios.
Everything we associate with intellectualism.
Yes, and the second tool which he used was he invented the front organizations. That you take something, a worthwhile cause, peace, democracy, happiness, freedom, okay, and then create an organization, the League for Promoting Freedom, and put some local dignitaries or famous people known for their virtue and knowledge, etc. And put them
The sanctimonious.
the sanctimonious. Okay, I'll go with that. And then from behind the funding and the direction where to move, where to go, that would be left for the communist organizer.
Well, we could continue talking about this for hours, but our time is limited. One last statement for people who are watching us and try to understand or be able to be critical of what is happening today. What do you recommend to them?
If you watch a video, watch it and then watch it again without sound. Okay, that would eliminate 60% of the emotional impact. And then you could see or think, what am I seeing here? Secondly, look who's behind it. Who is promoting this? It's if it's a known source or just a front organization. And today anybody could be a front. Yeah, just open up an account. Thirdly, is what emotions do they wish to evoke in me, and why? And why? This is not an easy process, because just watching hungry or wounded babies or whatever, even if you suspect this is something fishy about it, you don't want to look at it again. But this is the idea of critical thinking. This is the why, and read, but not new books, not new books. Because all the new books in the last 3 or 4 decades are anti-Israel, and this is another subject for a broadcast
For another time.
another time.
Dr. Ron Schleifer, thank you for the insights that you've given us into this. And to all of you who are watching us, we hope that we've given you some food for thought and to be critical even when you're watching us. We're not denying that. We have our position we're very honest about. We're trying to assist the state of Israel and be informative in ways that you're not receiving from other options or other sources. I'm Daniel Seaman. You've been watching Straight Up. Hope to see you again next week. Thank you for being with us.